What really happens when you only pursue pleasure, Alan Watts explains. Imagine a life where all you did was chase pleasure. Every action, every decision, every waking moment fueled by one single desire to feel good. Sounds like a dream, right? But what if that dream is actually a trap? What if constantly pursuing pleasure leads not to happiness, but to something far darker, far emptier? This is where Alan Watts, the legendary philosopher, comes in with a perspective that could change the way you see life, and more importantly, change the way you see yourself. Watts challenges us to look deeply into the very nature of pleasure. He asks, what is pleasure really? At its core, pleasure is a fleeting experience, a sensation in the body, a momentary thrill, a high. But here's the catch: it never lasts. Think about the last time you experienced something pleasurable. Maybe it was a delicious meal, an exhilarating concert, or even a moment of intimacy. For a while it felt amazing, but eventually it faded. And what followed? More often than not, there's a subtle sense of dissatisfaction, a craving for more. This is the paradox of pleasure that Watts points out. The more you chase it, the more it eludes you. It's like trying to catch a wave in the ocean. You see the wave coming, you ride it, and for a brief moment, you're on top of the world. But then, just as quickly as it appeared, the wave disappears, leaving you paddling in its wake, looking for the next one. And so the cycle continues, always seeking, never satisfied. Now, ask yourself a deep question: what happens when your entire life becomes about catching the next wave? When all you do is pursue pleasure, you become a slave to it. You start to believe that your happiness depends on external factors, on things you can't fully control. And here's the kicker: the more you pursue pleasure, the more you fear its opposite, pain. You begin to structure your life around avoiding discomfort, avoiding anything that doesn't feel good. But in doing so, you limit the depth of your experience. You become trapped in a shallow existence, skimming the surface of life without ever diving into its true richness. Watts reminds us that life is not just about the highs. It's about the full spectrum of experience: the highs, the lows, and everything in between. Pleasure is just one color in the vast tapestry of life. But when we fixate on it, we miss out on the beauty of the entire picture. Life becomes a constant chase, a never-ending quest for the next hit of dopamine, and in that chase we lose touch with the present moment. We become disconnected from ourselves, from others, from the world around us. Here's another question to ponder: what would happen if you stopped chasing pleasure? If you stopped trying to maximize every moment of your life for the sole purpose of feeling good? At first, it might sound terrifying. After all, we've been conditioned to believe that pleasure equals happiness. But Watts suggests that true happiness doesn't come from chasing pleasure, it comes from being fully present in whatever is happening, whether it's pleasurable or not.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound spiritual lesson.
Think about it. Some of the most meaningful moments in life are not necessarily pleasurable. They're moments of growth, moments of challenge, moments when you're pushed to your limits. These are the moments that shape you, that deepen your understanding of yourself and the world. But when you're constantly chasing pleasure, you miss these moments. You avoid them because they don't feel good in the short term. Watts calls this the pleasure trap. It's a cycle of endless wanting, endless craving, and ultimately, endless dissatisfaction. The more you try to escape discomfort, the more you become a prisoner of your own desires. And here's where things get really interesting. Watts argues that pleasure and pain are not opposites. They are two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. The more you try to maximize pleasure, the more you invite pain into your life. The more you try to avoid discomfort, the more you become aware of its presence. So, What's the solution? How do we break free from the pleasure trap? What gives us a profound answer? Let go. Stop trying to control life. Stop trying to manipulate every moment to maximize your pleasure. Instead, embrace life as it is: messy, unpredictable, and full of both pleasure and pain. When you let go of the need for constant pleasure, you open yourself up to a deeper, more fulfilling experience of life. You begin to realize that true happiness doesn't come from chasing highs. It comes from accepting the full range of human experience, from being fully present in each moment, no matter what it brings. The illusion of pleasure: why more never feels like enough. Let's dive deeper into this idea of pleasure. We've all had moments where we thought, if I could just have this, I'd be happy. Maybe it was a new car, a promotion, or a vacation. And when we finally got it, it felt great, at least for a while. But inevitably, that feeling faded. And what happened next? We found ourselves wanting something else, something more. This is the illusion of pleasure that Alan Watts speaks about: the belief that if we just accumulate enough pleasurable experiences, if we can just line up enough moments of joy, we'll finally be satisfied. But here's the truth: more is never enough. The very nature of pleasure is fleeting. It's designed to be temporary. It gives us a taste, but never the whole meal. And because it's temporary, we're left with a sense of longing after the pleasure fades, a craving for the next high. This is what keeps us stuck in a cycle of desire, constantly needing to feed the mind with more thrills, more excitement, more pleasure. But no matter how much we collect, we never reach a point where we say, "That's it. I'm done. I'm completely fulfilled." Why is this? Watts explains that it's because pleasure is inherently tied to time, and time, as we experience it, is an illusion. When we pursue pleasure, we're always thinking in terms of the future: what's coming next, what's going to feel good, what we're reaching for. But true satisfaction can't be found in the future because, as we know, the future doesn't really exist. It's just a mental projection. The only reality is now, this present moment. But when we're caught in the illusion of pleasure, we're never actually here. We're always somewhere else, mentally chasing after the next experience. Here's a question that might make you pause: why do we think pleasure will complete us? What is it about human nature that makes us so convinced that the next pleasurable experience will finally bring us peace? Watts would argue that it's because we've been conditioned to believe that happiness is something outside of ourselves. We've been taught that happiness is something we can attain through external means, through objects, status, or experiences. But this is a fundamental misunderstanding. True happiness, according to Watts, isn't something that can be chased or caught. It's something that arises naturally when we stop chasing it. Think about it. Have you ever noticed that the more you try to force happiness, the more elusive it becomes? The harder you try to create pleasure, the more it slips through your fingers. It's like trying to hold water in your hands. The tighter you grip, the faster it escapes. But when you relax, when you stop trying to control or chase it, happiness often appears in the most unexpected moments. So what do we do about this? How do we break free from the illusion that more pleasure equals more happiness? Watts suggests that we need to fundamentally change our relationship with pleasure. Instead of seeing it as the ultimate goal, we need to see it for what it is: just one small part of life's experience. Pleasure isn't bad, of course. It's a beautiful part of being human. But when we make it our sole focus, we lose sight of the bigger picture. We become trapped in a cycle of always wanting, always seeking, and never finding. Here's a thought-provoking question: what if you stop trying to maximize pleasure? What if, instead of constantly seeking more, you simply allowed yourself to be content with what is? When you stop chasing pleasure, you begin to realize that contentment comes not from having more, but from being fully present with what you already have, and in that presence you find a deeper, more lasting sense of peace, a peace that no external pleasure can provide. The balance between pleasure and pain, the secret to true contentment. Now that we've uncovered the illusion of pleasure, let's explore something we often try to avoid at all costs: pain. We live in a world that tells us to seek pleasure and avoid pain at every opportunity. But what if we've misunderstood the relationship between the two? Alan Watts introduces a radical idea: pleasure and pain are not opposites, they are deeply interconnected. In fact, you can't have one without the other. To truly understand pleasure, you have to experience pain. To know joy, you must have known sadness. They're two sides of the same coin. But why do we instinctively avoid pain and discomfort? Why do we seek to live in a bubble of constant pleasure, isolated from the difficulties of life? Watts explains that this avoidance comes from a misunderstanding of what pain represents. Pain, like pleasure, is simply part of the human experience. It's not something to be feared or avoided at all costs. In fact, pain is often the catalyst for growth, for deeper understanding, for transformation. It's in those moments of discomfort that we learn the most about ourselves, about our resilience, our ability to adapt, and our capacity to endure. Here's a deep question to reflect on: what if, instead of running from pain, you embraced it? What if, instead of seeing it as your enemy, you saw it as your teacher? This shift in perspective can change everything. When we stop seeing pain as something to be avoided, we stop fearing it. And once we stop fearing it, we stop being controlled by it. We begin to live with a sense of freedom that goes beyond the simple pursuit of pleasure. Think about the times in your life when you've experienced the most personal growth. Were they during moments of pure pleasure, or were they during times of challenge and difficulty? Most of us would agree that it's in the face of adversity that we truly come alive. This is where the real depth of the human experience lies, not in the constant pursuit of pleasurable moments, but in our ability to navigate both the highs and the lows with grace. Watts suggests that true contentment comes not from avoiding pain or maximizing pleasure, but from finding a balance between the two. Life is a dance between these forces, and the more we try to resist one in favor of the other, the more we suffer. It's like trying to force the ocean to only produce waves of a certain size. The ocean doesn't work that way, and neither does life. There are times of calm and times of storm, and each has its own beauty, its own lessons to offer. Here's another thought-provoking question for you: what if you allowed both pleasure and pain to be part of your life, without trying to control or avoid either? What would happen if you accepted the ebb and flow of life, rather than constantly seeking one and running from the other? In this acceptance, Watts believes, lies true freedom. You stop being a slave to your desires and fears. You stop trying to manipulate life to fit your narrow definition of happiness. Instead, you open yourself up to the full spectrum of experience, and in doing so, you find a deeper, more lasting sense of peace. This balance between pleasure and pain is essential to living a fulfilled life. When we embrace both, we stop living in a state of constant craving and anxiety. Instead, we learn to appreciate the present moment for what it is, without needing it to be any different. And this, Watts argues, is the secret to true contentment. It's not about having more pleasure or avoiding pain, it's about learning to live with both, to appreciate both, and to find peace in the midst of it all. Letting go: why surrendering to life brings true happiness. As we've explored the intricate relationship between pleasure and pain, we arrive at the ultimate insight Alan Watts offers us: to experience true happiness, we must surrender. But what does it mean to surrender? In our society, surrender is often seen as weakness, as giving up. But Watts redefines it as an act of profound strength and wisdom, a conscious choice to let go of our need for control and embrace life as it is, rather than how we want it to be. When we let go, we stop resisting the natural flow of life. We stop clinging to pleasure and stop running from pain. Instead, we allow life to unfold in its own rhythm, trusting that every experience, whether joyful or painful, has its place. This doesn't mean we become passive or indifferent. It means we stop trying to bend life to our will and, instead, learn to ride the waves as they come. It's the difference between struggling against the current and floating with it. Here's a deep question: what are you holding on to right now that's keeping you from experiencing happiness? Maybe it's the desire for more pleasure, more success, or more control. Or perhaps it's the fear of discomfort, of failure, or of the unknown. Whatever it is, holding on creates tension in your life. It keeps you trapped in a cycle of wanting and fearing, never fully at peace. Watts teaches that when we let go of this need to control, we unlock the door to true happiness. Happiness isn't something we can force or manufacture. It's not something we find through constant pleasure or avoid through escaping pain. Happiness is what remains when we stop resisting life. It's the stillness at the center of the storm, the quiet presence that's always there when we stop fighting reality. Think about the moments when you felt most at peace. Were they the moments when everything was going perfectly according to plan, or were they the moments when you simply accepted life as it was, without needing it to be any different? The paradox is that in surrendering, in letting go of our attachment to how life should be, we find the happiness we've been seeking all along. So, I leave you with this final question: what would your life look like if you truly let go? If you stopped chasing pleasure, stopped avoiding pain, and simply allowed yourself to be present with what is. In that surrender, you may discover that true happiness isn't something to pursue, it's something that's been within you all along, waiting for you to let go.